Hi everybody, thank you all for coming. I'm Summer, I'm the curator here at the museum. So first, everybody please take a second to turn off or silence your cell phone so we don't have any disruptions. As you all know, the main announcement is we're finally open. So I hope that you all take the opportunity to look at the new exhibits. We're really excited about all of them. As always, admission is free for members and pricing for non-members is at the front desk. This year we'll be offering both an in-person summer camp and a camp to go for kids. The in-person camp will be focusing on math, art, science, and history and will run from June 14th to June 18th. Enrollment starts on May 17th, so contact Jennifer for more information. Her card is at that back table. And then the Camp to Go will guide summer campers on a tour around the island, and it'll be on sale starting June 1st. So contact Thea for that one. Her card is also back there. For our upcoming programs, our Third on Third is on the 21st. And we'll have Frank Ofelt speak about his newest book entitled Fort Clinch, Fernandina, and the Civil War. And then for our June Brown Bag Lunch, we'll have Tammy Kozak, who will discuss her experience taking on a major renovation of her home in the historic district by herself. So that's a little preview for next month. But today we have Sal Cumella. Sal studied history and historic preservation at the University of Florida. Before moving to Fernandina, he served as the preservation planner for the city of Gainesville and for a nonprofit preservation organization in Nantucket, Massachusetts. He has been the preservation planner for the City of Fernandina Beach for the past 5 years. So everyone please welcome Sal.
Thank you guys. Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited by the turnout. I didn't think there would be this many people, so it's great that you guys are here. I'm really excited to give this presentation. It's something kind of near and dear to my heart that I don't get to do quite as often as I would like. So today, we're going to kind of explore often overlooked artifacts in Fernandina's streetscape. So, as Summer said, I am the city's historic preservation planner. I wear a lot of different hats and do a lot of different things for the city. Aside from, everybody probably knows me from the Historic District Council. I do development reviews, things like that. But one of the things that I really love best about my job is that every day I have new projects and learn something new about the city, so it's never dull. One of the things that I get to do, and by the way, here's my contact information. If anybody ever has any question about anything in one of our historic districts, please feel free to give me a call or email. I'm always around and love to kind of hear different questions from citizens. So there's my contact info, or you can contact the museum. They know how to get in touch with me. One of the aspects of my job that I really, really love is the research aspect of it. And so when I'm working with citizens or developers or even just kind of wandering around downtown on my own, there's always something new to discover. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you guys about today and be able to share with everybody. Just kind of how I go about when I'm kind of walking around downtown, how I fall down those rabbit holes and kind of go off and find new interesting little things that are always kind of hiding in plain sight. I joke a lot that I am a time traveler. And being here at the museum, probably a lot of you are too. And what I mean by that is I've walked down downtown, and I'm usually not involved in just what's going on in 2021. As you know, Fernandina has a long history. I always think of it kind of as a storybook with chapters. And when you're looking at the streetscape, it's the same setting that it's been for hundreds of years. And it evolves, but it remains the same in a lot of ways. A lot of different characters, different costumes, but if you're really understanding how it's evolved, really looking at it that way, kind of as an evolving story, is really important. And I always stress to everybody, always remember that you're a character in that story. And so we are writing the future history of the city. So this is one of my favorite photographs from the museum's collection. And the reason I love it is there is a lot going on in this picture. So let's time travel back, turn of the century, Center Street. And so, like I said, your eye really doesn't land on any one thing in this photograph, because there's so much going on with it. And so many different elements, some that are still there, some that aren't still there, some that explain why things look the way they do. So if we can be kind of a little interactive, if anyone wants to throw their hand up, that's fine. What does anybody kind of notice in this photo? Any elements, anything they find strange or odd, anything they recognize as still being around today? Is there anything that stands out?
The streets are wider.
The streets are wider, definitely. So Center Street, definitely at this point, was a lot wider. It was before the 1970s pedestrian enhancing of Center Street. So it was a much wider thoroughfare, which of course, we were traveling by horse, wagons, so they needed a little more room. The other thing there would be the street's dirt. Obviously, a lot of animals going back and forth, the wagons, dirt streets. Some of the other things I'll kind of point out are, a lot of the buildings are still there today and look a lot like they do.
Is that the coffee shop?
The coffee shop's actually on this side.
Okay.
Just to orient you, this
Right there.
is where the yogurt, Island Time yogurt
Oh, yeah.
is.
Oh, yeah.
That building there, and then that's Harborware and Celtic Charm, I think. And then this would be the fudge shop on this side.
Oh, wow.
Looks like there's no traffic control.
So you don't see any stop signs, you don't see any traffic lights. I will point out what you do see in this photograph are the power poles that are strung kind of all over, back and forth. In this photo you can't see it, but there are actually lights that would hang across the street as street lights at this point. Some other things just to kind of keep in mind as we go through and look at other things are, look at the rooftops. I always like to point out there are a lot of different chimneys. We would have had heated these buildings by fireplace. A lot of them, most of them, are still there. So yeah, we'll keep coming back to this picture as we talk about different things. And if anybody has any questions, just either shout out or raise your hand. So when I kind of walk down the street, whether that's here at home in Fernandina or in any other city I'm visiting anywhere in the world, I really try to read the buildings and the streetscape to kind of get an idea of the history of that place. And so here are my top 3 tips for reading the buildings and your streetscape is look up. I tell everybody to look up. There's a lot of stuff you're missing if you're not looking up. And these days, our thumbs are going and we're kind of staring down at our phones, and a lot of stuff gets often overlooked just by not looking up. Pay attention to the small details. There's a lot of very small details kind of all over our environment that really speak to different aspects of history. So those are important. And then question everything. What I find when I give walking tours and things downtown to people is I'll point out something on a building and kind of talk about it, and everybody will say, oh, we've seen that, but we never questioned what it is. You kind of have to ask those questions, and sometimes you get answers, sometimes you don't. Sometimes it leads you to other things. I've, like I said, fallen down that rabbit hole before and spent lots of hours looking at things from very simple things. Again, looking up, really important. As you guys all are aware, we have some great architecture here in downtown Fernandina. What I stress to everybody is these buildings were made to last multiple generations, whereas today a commercial building, it's designed to have a life of somewhere between 25 to 50 years. That wasn't the way they were doing it. There were, materially, they were much more significant than a lot of our buildings today, and also in craftsmanship. So you can see the masonry details, simple things like this is the 3-star saloon. And just out of curiosity, is anybody here visiting that doesn't live here? Okay. All right, so everybody's local, that's cool. Again, the masonry detail, this is a really good example because they've, although in preservation we don't recommend painting buildings, they've actually done a good job kind of highlighting the masonry and getting that detailing to pop. A lot of other buildings, kind of if it's one color, you don't notice as much. But again, that high level of detail there is really indicative of Fernandina. When looking at the buildings, the first thing I always do is ask myself, when was this building built? And sometimes that can surprise you. Sometimes things look a lot older than they really are, or aren't as old. But a lot of times the building itself will tell you how old it is. This is a great tradition of putting the dates on the building. And as you can see, that's up in the top left corner, the Chandlery building, which that actual date plaque is new. It was put on not too long ago when that ground floor was redone, but it is the original date. But you can see the Kidd building, which also gives us more information about the original owner of the building. The AD 1904 is the cornerstone to City Hall. And then, of course, the 2005 up top is a new building, so we're still putting the dates on our buildings downtown. And that doesn't happen on all new construction, but it's thinking into the future. Here's another photograph from the museum's collection. This is the other side of the street that we were looking at now. So the fudge shop would be at this intersection here. And again, there's a lot going on in this photo, which I really like to kind of pick apart kind of the details. So again, you can see all the buildings have their chimneys. We've got that electric in place. At this point, still, lots of carts. You see lots of cart traffic, which means there's lots of animals. You see kind of grass growing on the side of the median of the road. It is a dirt road. Lots of awnings. Awnings came all the way over the sidewalk. So if we time traveled back, it would look different in that respect, that you would have a lot of different types of awnings going all the way out to the street. And there'd be lots of signage on them. There'd be, the merchants would hang their wares on them, and so it would be very different in that respect.
And no trees, right?
And no trees, that's a really good point. Even though Center Street's really wide at this point, there's no shade. So, would have been hot, would have been noisy, and probably wouldn't have smelled the best.
What's the sign? Is that a street sign?
This sign here?
Yes, what is that? Can't quite
So it says jewelry. It's actually a pharmacy and jewelry. It's a really unique sign because it's got a pole that goes out into the street and goes over the sidewalk. And I believe it even has, I think that's a clock that you're seeing underneath the sign that hangs in this period. Dentists, barbers, you all had your kind of symbol out front. Also take note in this one, you've got very large signs on the awnings. You've got advertising on the sides of the buildings.
And we still have some of those.
And we do. And so, very animal-y. This photo not that old, but so even up until recently, I think it was only a year or two ago that we stopped having the carriage rides. There would have been not just horses, ox, chickens, all kinds of animals, which leads to, I don't have in this presentation any photos, but the study of fences in Fernandina is actually a really interesting one because, again, there was a high level of craftsmanship in them. And so something as simple as keeping in your livestock, you would have some really interesting fences all around the city, which are fortunately making a comeback. A lot of people are really researching what their fences would have looked like and doing a good job bringing them back. And again, because we're so many animals, we still have artifacts in the streetscape of them. This is the Horse Trough. It's the last remaining one. circa 1885 to 1935. This one sits over in the City Hall parking lot, if anybody hasn't seen it. It's one of those things that you can easily overlook because it's got cars parked around it. Next to it, kind of leaning there, are carriage steps. Would have been common everywhere throughout the city. It's how you mounted your horse or a carriage. There are a lot of them still throughout the city, so kind of keep your eyes open as you're going around, especially in front of some of the larger estate homes. You'll see them a lot. Sometimes they're overgrown with bushes and have landscaping hiding them. Some of them have sank and they're kind of covered with grass, but a lot of them are still there. Again, having that many animals downtown, watering your animals was important. This is in front of the fountain in front of the depot. It's not its original location, but it is an original fountain to Center Street. Here's an example of one of those carriage steps. That's in front of the Bailey House.
Oh, never noticed.
Yep, yeah, it's one of those things. It's easy to overlook, but they are all over town. Again, we're back to our main photo. Now I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about the sidewalks and the curbing. So in this period, you can see that they've already put in sidewalks. The curbs and sidewalks are in place, but the streets are still dirt at this point. It's probably actually easier for horses and wagons for the dirt. The changeover to brick didn't actually occur until cars started being a little bit more prevalent. Cars did not fare as well in these muddy streets. Here's that sign again. You were asking about the drugs and jewelry.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting property. This is where that old Chow restaurant used to be and the Out of Hand store. And again, that's, I've done research. It's on the Sanborn maps. It was actually a barber shop at one point, that little building there. But it, go ahead.
Did you say when that photo was taken?
So this photo is around the turn of the century. Because the sidewalks and curbs are there, it's after 1905, so I'd say probably 1910, somewhere around there.
The stores and services, did they pull up the sidewalk at, like 5 o'clock, or were they open at night because of the lighting?
That is a really good question. I've never had anybody ask that question, but that's a really good question. I would imagine...
The question, please.
So the question was, the businesses and services that were downtown, were they open at night? Because there's not as much lighting or anything downtown, would they have stayed open? I don't know the answer to that. I would suspect yes, because if you think about the types of things that were happening downtown, they were mostly services that people needed. There was the grocery store, the cobbler, those types of things. And that's... before we talked about a little about Sanborn maps, and so I'll tell everybody a little bit about those now. They're one of our biggest tools that we use for researching what was in a building, what a building is made out of, and what they are is the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company did fire insurance maps so that they could rate different cities and know the threat of fire. They also showed where firehouses were, where water sources were, cisterns, things like that, so that in the event anything happened, they've got a map, they know exactly what they're looking at, and for your fire insurance. Because again, in this period, a lot of the buildings were wood frame buildings, so fire was a very big risk. We had a very big fire here before the turn of the century, as a lot of cities did in their wooden historic districts. So those fire insurance maps really tell us a lot. The University of Florida, on their digital collection, you can Google it, they have most of those maps available where you can zoom in, and most of them will tell you what the building was, if it was a dwelling, if it was a store, if it was a funeral home. We even have some that we've discovered are what's listed on the map as female boarding houses, which has a little side note that says bordello. So the maps are really interesting and a great tool to learn kind of what was happening in the buildings. Because from this, unless we know that is a drug and jewelry store, just by the sign. This is an interesting one too. It's the Fernandina Development Company, which was there headquartered where the fudge shop currently is. And there's some interesting wagon wheels laying against the wall, and I kind of love to always look at the background stuff. There's a barrel hanging out here, just some random things in the street. So those businesses, they were mostly service businesses. So they probably, even though it was dark, probably were open a good amount of time because this was it. So talking about the sidewalk surfaces, in 1905, we did the sidewalks in the downtown area, in the Center Street area. And the original sidewalks are these coquina hex pavers in 1905, yeah. And they still exist out in the streetscape, in the wild, as I call it. Unfortunately, there aren't as many left as there once were. Originally, all the sidewalks were the hex pavers. And you can see there were two different kinds. I've seen cities all over the world have different colored hex pavers because that was what was popular as a paving material in this period. Ours are natural colored and gray. The gray was actually made, we have some records that show that it was made by adding lamplight, which is lamp black, soot basically, into the mixture and making it that way. So that's how they made the gray. As you can see, they were prevalent. They were up and down Center Street. These still exist today. These are in front of the Lassane House, and across the street at the courthouse, they've been lifted up and reset. So they are throughout the downtown randomly. Okay.
What does the sign say behind the paintings?
This here?
Yeah.
That says Kentucky Fried Chicken. So that's the Marina restaurant downtown. And they were at one point, they sold Kentucky Fried Chicken when it was franchised out. The building, you'll note, one of the cool things is the building is striped like a Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket. At that point, it's painted. There's also, this is probably 1970s, but there's some mid-century kind of things on it, like the metal awning. There's a neon light sign that says Marina with a light-up teacup or coffee cup on it. And then there's actually a giant Colonel Sanders that lights up on the front of the building. So we'll talk a little bit about advertising, but this is a good example kind of the evolution of advertising downtown. One of the really interesting things is that we have people putting back hex pavers. So this is a new hex paver installation. This is over on Ash Street at the Summer House real estate building. And so they're the same dimension. And yeah, give downtown its original look back, its period of significance look. The curbs, at the same time that the sidewalks, the hex pavers were put in, they were trying to improve and keep that edge, brought in granite curbing, which is still mostly throughout downtown. A lot of people step over it all day long and don't really notice it's there, or how big it is. They're actually slabs of granite. So they actually, even though you're only seeing a couple of inches, they go pretty good, into the ground to keep them in place. Obviously granite, not a natural stone to Florida. They were imported, presumably by boat or the railroad. But they are still downtown and are an important part of our downtown. So at that period around 1905, you would have had a nice formalized sidewalk, the granite curbs, and then stepped off into the dirt street, which was the functional area. But again, still no trees. Back to this photo again, no trees. You've got a nice sidewalk. Here's some of those awnings that go over the sidewalk. You can see a lot of the merchants have kind of things underneath the awnings, so it was more of their selling space. I will point out, now that we're looking at this, kind of some of the additions that get added onto buildings. It's always interesting to see how buildings evolve and things that get added onto buildings. One of the things when I'm looking at buildings, whether it's a commercial building or a residence downtown, in reading the building is always looking at the massing of the different parts of the building to kind of tell its evolution. Most residences downtown, or in this period, like the kitchens were detached. They weren't built with plumbing in them, so that got added on later. And you'll see those additions throughout time as different things were added to these properties. And same things goes for commercial spaces. A lot of them, even today, you'll see on the backs have add-ons and different things from different periods.
Did most of the commercial buildings have residents on the second floor, as was tradition in most communities?
Yep, so that was, here, you would have owned the building, you would have had your residence above and your business below.
So normally it's the owner of the building who would live on these?
Yep, traditionally, that's what we've found. As you know, today, there are very few residences in commercial buildings, just because of building codes and those mixing of uses. It's a little more difficult to do. But yes, traditionally, you would live downtown above your business. So once cars became a little bit more prevalent, in the 1930s, the streets were bricked. So there are some, as you can see, the bricks, there are some pretty hefty bricks. A lot better quality than we could get today. But all of Center Street was bricked. As you can see on the sidewalk here, just pallets and pallets of bricks stacked up.
Where were they made, those bricks?
The bricks were made in Georgia.
Uh-huh.
Off the top of my head, can't remember the company. But we have some of them downtown in different places where you can actually read where we've left them face up so you can see the manufacturer. And this is just more of them laying it. Again, you can see the sidewalks are in place there. This one's interesting. You've got St. Peter's in the background, the Keystone Hotel to the left. This one actually shows a period light fixture there. That's another interesting study, is the lighting fixtures of Fernandina. They change with technology, so there's always something different in different periods. And so this is the street bricked. In 1924, we had a streetcar, of course, that went from the docks all the way to Main Beach. So at this point, you can see the caption is, the streetcars are gone, but the tracks still remain. So the tracks were right there in the center.
What is significant there that you would recognize?
So this is an interesting one, the building's no longer there. That's where Pelindaba Lavender is, that smaller building. This is 4th Street, the intersection of 4th Street. So the stores like Hudson and Perry, all those stores are down here in the lower section of this building.
Trees.
There are some trees in this section. This would be up by the post office. So you'll actually see, if you go to the post office, the granite curbing, the original granite curbing, curves around the trees and has tree wells in it, which were an original design as part of the post office. So those trees, those tree wells and trees are still there. Not the original trees, but the tree wells are still there.
So they probably, they planted the trees probably when they did the whole sidewalk scape.
I think these trees were done in 1912 when they did the post office.
So they're pretty good size.
Yeah.
Sal, when they did the bricking of the road, did they find that flooding became a problem then much more than having the sand or?
I don't know. The brick is still pervious, so I would imagine that some of the water washed off. At that point, the brick kind of did, the water ran off to the...
Well, you know, we have now in the middle of Center Street the big grates where all the water goes down. I don't see that here, and I'm just wondering, whoa.
There was no stormwater management in that plan. No, yeah, that stormwater, wasn't a thing at that point. It really just flowed into the brick.
Could you comment more about the trolley line?
Sure.
Were there passengers coming in on one end?
It was a passenger trolley, and it would go. It also went up Beach Street, so it kind of circled around downtown. It was really that access between the beach and downtown. We did have tourism, and some people don't want to acknowledge we've always had tourism. So people were here visiting and would come in through a waterfront on the river, come downtown, and you would be able to get to the beach. The beach had a lot of beach casinos and hotels and things like that on the beach at that point. So.
Were they washed out during a storm?
Yeah, most of those are lost. Sliders, I think, is the only older structure that's still there, but that wasn't one of the casinos, it was one of the hotels.
What is at the very end, down at the river?
So down at the river, I apologize for not having a shot of that, but down at the river, and that's a whole nother another lecture. But down at the river was a very busy place. There were a lot of buildings. There was a wharf that went out into the water very far. We were a port for the logging industry, later on phosphate. So there was a lot going on. There was a lot of commerce going on down at the waterfront. It was a lot different than it is today. There were a lot more buildings than there are today. The wharf was a lot bigger than you would expect.
Was the shrimping industry?
Shrimping came later, but yes, that's definitely, a lot of those buildings were added during the period of shrimping. Here's just an example. This is later on. This is about the 1940s. As you can see, we've gotten away from the dirt. The bricks are in place now. It's a lot cleaner, a lot more automotive friendly. It's the post office. The Lassane House would be over here. Again, one of those are lamp posts from that period. Power is still overhead power lines.
What was that parade?
The parade, I don't know if we can tell. I think in, goes back. It does look like a military parade, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Veterans Day, maybe?
Because of the flag, or if you notice there are American flags up and down Center Street, I would say something like Veterans Day, Memorial Day. So those, the bricks, obviously, they need to be reset every once in a while. As in a lot of cities, we didn't maintain the bricks. We removed them, asphalted over some sections of them. So now Center Street and downtown is asphalt, but there are still sections, like in our crosswalks, where you will see those are the original Center Street bricks that were relayed as crosswalks. They're also in some other downtown projects, like the Butterfly Garden in front of the train depot. Those are original Center Street bricks, and they were laid facing up so that it has the maker's mark on them. That has that company from Georgia that you can see still. I love this one. So the bricks are still there in some spots, and are trying to fight their way out. So they're trying to make a comeback on their own. This isn't actually in the street. This is actually in the parking lot of the post office, which was a all brick parking lot. And they asphalted just over the brick, and so now the asphalt is failing and the brick is peeking through. So if you're walking by their entrance driveway, take a look at that. And you can see that's actually the granite curb in place there. Another element we have throughout downtown are the street sign markers. This is, and that's the way you see them today, but in this photo you can see that's what that is right there. That's City Hall. City Hall was built in 1904. Those trees are pretty mature, so I'd say that's about 1920 probably. So we know that the markers date probably at least to the 1920s. Most people don't really look at them too much anymore, but they are still there and something that we want to keep in the streetscape to recognize that time period. Looking up, how many people have ever noticed the street signs downtown? Okay, a couple. Good. So we do have some of our enamel street signs still on the buildings downtown. Not the most convenient when you're in a car. You'd have to really look all the way up at the top of the building or the second floor of the building to see them. But they are still there, and we do want to protect those and save those. I will point out, it's interesting the spelling of Center Street, T-E-R. Here's another one on 2nd Street. This picture I really like when we talk about advertising. During this period, there would have been a lot of brands coming into play for the first time. It wasn't just people down the street making things. It was brands like Wrigley's PK Chewing Sweet, so Wrigley's Chewing Gum later on. Drink, I'm not sure what the drink is, but it's a bottled drink of some kind, painted pretty much 2 stories of the building. So really everybody was kind of vying for advertising, and this was nationwide. So you see this a lot throughout downtowns in this period. A lot of advertising on the awnings, a lot of painted signs. You'll see there's the Palace sign there, down here on the bottom of the building. So it would have been just visually a lot to look at.
Can you go back 1 sec?
Sure.
What's the tall tower type thing in the right in the distance?
That's the courthouse. That's the courthouse steeple.
Thank you.
So yeah, we're looking kind of down from the waterfront here. So your courthouse is on the right. This is the Chandlery building here. Let's go out.
Our saloon doesn't have Coca-Cola on it.
Who said that? That's a very good observation. So we have the Coca-Cola sign now. It is not a historic sign. It was added later. There always was a sign there historically, but this is actually where the Palace sign is now, where the Coca-Cola sign is now. You'll notice that the building was only 1 story there at the Palace. That second story was added later, and that's something that we find a lot of times in demolition when they're demolishing a building or doing a rehab of the interior of a building, where you've added a building or taken down a building. A lot of times you'll find these, we call them legacy signs or ghost signs, for they're advertising for businesses that are no longer there or for products. Again, the Chandlery building, you'll see the D.A. Kelly company sign on top. So there were no regulations, so you could pretty much do whatever you want. If you think about other buildings you've seen in downtowns, hotels and things that would have these big light up signs on top of them. So we did have our share here too. It's a really good shot of the light fixtures in those periods. They were on the electric poles. So that's why they present that way. Also, you can see the granite curbs really well, and the hex pavers. You've got a mix of horse-drawn wagons and cars at this point. Awnings. Your typical awnings would have been fabric awnings, just all the way over, and then those metal shed awnings that you see in some of the photos. Again, this photo, you can see, again, a lot of advertising. That was actually for the business that was there. You'll see neon signs in this period. The brick streets at that point are still there. Again, down at the waterfront, there are a lot more buildings than there currently are. This is an example, as I said, a lot of these ghost signs or legacy signs still exist. This is the sign in the Pocket Park.
Oh, okay.
I will give a prize to anyone who can tell me what it says, because I've been trying to find out for a while, and I can't find a picture of it or anybody who knows what it says.
It doesn't say orange down the bottom, does it?
No, it's like oregano.
No?
It's like one of those one of those pictures where you have to squint and tell what it is.
It's an Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon.
And then one way we would kind of verify if we made some words out is to go back to those Sanborn maps I was talking about and see what type of business was listed there in different periods, which would help us determine what it was. This one is on the side of Lindy's Jewelry, and this one, if you can see up top, it says White Flower. The other thing I like to point out about this one, again, kind of reading the buildings. Obviously, there was a building attached to this building at one point. So you had the advertising there. A building was added at some point, and then the building was subtracted. And you've got this pattern here where it's been sealed up. Clearly, that was the roof of the adjoining building. Also, you've got this mark here, which tells us there was a door there that was filled in, so those two buildings functioned together. More legacy signage. This is on Center Street. It's a little bit stylized, kind of Art Deco, I'd say the script is. So maybe 1930s. But it says Western Meats, and on the other side it says Groceries. And again, you can easily walk past this without, seeing it and knowing what it was. But if you go back on the Sanborn maps, the building actually was a grocer. Another interesting element downtown are the mosaics. A lot of the storefronts had these really interesting mosaics that were either hex tiles or penny round tiles. So you've got different colors, different patterns, things that said things. One of the interesting things is, again, we have people going back now where they've lost some of those mosaics and just adding back new tile that's appropriate. It's the proper size and scale, but it's clearly a modern tile floor. This one's interesting. This is the Allen Building, the department store, which was downtown. And out front, out the entrances, there were these mosaics that say it's Allen's Way, which was his slogan. There were two of them. When the store went out of business and was remodeled into being an office building, one of them was removed. So you'll only see this one downtown now. But what a lot of other people don't know is that the other one actually was relocated to Boscobello Cemetery in the Allen family's plot. So if you're out at Boscobello, see if you can find the Allen's Way mosaic. Another really, really interesting thing we have downtown, which is common to a lot of downtowns of our period, are the cast storefront elements. There are, in this period, there was during the late Victorian period, a lot of ornamentation on the buildings, and a lot of buildings were going up. So this is a catalog here from 1900 for the Mesker & Company Architectural Ironworks. And what I love about this is you can go through these catalogs and say, that's this piece of our building here, that's this piece of this building here. So that's the Fudge Shop, as it is today. And you'll see this is down here on the posts, which says George L. Mesker & Company Ironworks, Evansville, Indiana. So they're marked. Usually you can find the marking. Not all their pieces are marked, though. We have a lot of these downtown that can be attributed to Mesker Brothers. And so this is just, I found in the catalog where that piece came from. So we know its part number, we know where it came from. And it's interesting because the Mesker Brother catalogs are kind of mix and match. So no two buildings are exactly alike because they're using all different pieces from those catalogs. So this just happens to be those column pieces. Here's another of our Mesker buildings downtown. So all that metalwork up top on the second floor, it's all, you can identify it from a Mesker Brothers catalog. It was all purchased. So that's why a lot of downtowns of this period have this similar appearance. And it's interesting as trends change. During this period, these were regarded as cheap buildings because they were pre-manufactured and assembled. Whereas now, we really regard them highly as being really, artistic.
They've lasted a long time.
They have lasted a long time. We have, I think, 5 Mesker Brothers storefronts downtown, and then some other random pieces which may or may not be. This is an interesting one. This is the Lacier Motors on Center Street. I like this photo because it's got a couple of things going on in it. You can clearly see the hex papers and the granite curbs in it. You can see the parking meters. So if you go out today on Center Street, you'll still see, I think, some holes where flags and parking meters were previously. You'll see the Lacier Motor sign poking through, but at this point it was Mary Kay's department store. And talking about those Mesker facades and elements, you'll see the columns have this very unique design. Now this building, and the headers over the storefront are metal.
And what building was that? Is it today?
So today, I don't have a picture of the whole building. Today it is the Amelia Tavern. And so that building is not there. It's a new building. But as they were demoing the building, and in the new design, which is really complementary to the original design of the building, they were able to reuse those parts. So if you look today at those parts of the building, those aren't recreations. Those are the actual salvaged parts of that building. So this photo, really, when I'm out in the streetscape looking at different elements, really I'm always hunting for anomalies. And so this one caught my eye. I don't know if you can tell here. There's a raised edge there. There's also something going on right there where the brickwork is showing through. Here's a closer shot of it. And so when I'm looking at this, it tells me something was there. It was some kind of roof. It has an arched top, so it was either a window or a door. And when you go back to our first photo, it was that thing, which opened into the adjoining building, which is interesting. And so there are lots of those types of things kind of hiding in plain sight all over downtown.
What would have been on that second floor? What, the expansion of the residence?
You know, I don't know if it was just maybe an access stairway or something. But I do find it interesting that the entrance is from this building into this building. So maybe they owned both buildings and were using this at the rooftop of the one-story building for something. I don't know. This is an interesting one. Again, you've got that Mesker storefront up top, but you've got this going on down below. And the interesting thing about downtown buildings in most cities is the first floor changes often with whatever the use of the first floors are. So a lot of our storefronts downtown aren't the original storefronts, but the second floors are. Go back one. Traditionally, in commercial buildings downtowns in this period, you'd have a storefront which had glass, so you could have a storefront down there. And then the second, what's called the two-part commercial block, the second part would have a different feel to it altogether, and it's got windows. It was probably residential, and that's what you see typically throughout most downtowns. But as the uses changed, those storefronts changed out. And so you'll see a lot of ours downtown. We've still got some good examples of, from the 1950s to the 1970s, a lot of kind of mid-century changes that were made. There's some facades that are tiled, things like that. You'll see a lot more of them in other cities because we've tried to stay with our Victorian period. But this is one of those spaces between, this would be the storefront, first floor down here, and the second floor, and then you've got kind of this going on here, which originally may have been windows. You notice the marks on the building. We talked about those awnings. Because most likely this building had a very large awning over the front of it. And that's just kind of one of those clues that something was going on there at some point in the past. This one I threw in just because, check out kind of everything on the building. This one, has some battle damage. It's clearly there was a sign there at one point that hung from the building. So you'll see holes and things like that. This one, which is adjacent to the Pocket Park, a lot of times when buildings needed restuccoing, repointing of the brick, instead of repointing it, there was a period where people felt it was better just to stucco it. It would just seal it up more. And so you'll see a lot of our buildings are stuccoed, but they were originally masonry buildings with a high level of detail. So this one, they were doing some repairs to the stucco, and they realized the stucco wasn't attached really well to the building. So they took advantage of that and removed the stucco on that one side of the building. The front was never stuccoed, but the sides had been stuccoed. And they really restored back it's cleaned up now, but that level of detail in the brickwork, even around the windows, it kind of dulls it out when you stucco it. But you will still see, the bricks kind of are this color now. Because they had the stucco on them. So that's always a telltale sign that those bricks were stuccoed over at one point in the past. This one's a cool one. This is the Hardware store. And again, talking about the two-part commercial block. So you've got the windows up top. You would have had a storefront down below. This one's interesting because you can see there's a distinct difference between the brick storefront of the bottom and the brick of the second floor. This one had its original storefront removed, had something else put in there, and then at some point had a brick storefront put in place on the first floor, which is why you're seeing the brick on the bottom is a lot more modern than the brick on the top. The brick on the top is the original brick. The other thing that's interesting about this one is if you look on the sidewalk as you're walking past it, there's some strip of mid-century tile here. At some point, probably mid-century, the storefront would have had the entrance there. And so this relic you're seeing there is kind of just evidence that the entrance to the building shifted somehow in that storefront when it got redone, which is under that window here. So the buildings get reoriented, the doors and window sizes get changed up a lot of times on these buildings. This is also that building. You kind of see clear the brickwork on the ground floor versus the second floor. The other thing that's interesting about this is you see a lot of the buildings have little remnants of the knob and tube electrical systems that used to go into the buildings, things like that. They're still just kind of hanging out on the sides of buildings, or old brackets, things like that. And that is all I have. If anybody wants to talk about any of the other photos or has any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Okay, now go ahead. Okay, the Palace Saloon's on the corner,
Correct.
and what's next to it? Palace Saloon?
So this is all the palace, and then this is the decantery.
Okay.
And so if you think about that other photo we were looking at, where the Palace Saloon sign, the Coca-Cola sign is now, that's where that Wrigley's mural was. And this second story of the building is a newer addition that wasn't there. And so the palace, the historic palace sign is actually on that wall that's now covered.
Okay, so how did they manage to get their Palace Saloon on another different building, unless it's owned by the...
They own that building too.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
Do you know when the Coke mural was done?
The Coke mural, I think I've looked before to figure out when it was done. I think it was late 80s, early 90s, so it's not that old. But there, like I said, there was a Palace Saloon mural, it just wasn't on that building. This mock-up of downtown is interesting. The palace sign that runs on the building is a mid-century sign, obviously, but we actually consider that a legacy sign now too. It's significant because people identify it, even though it's not the period of the building and the period of our downtown. It in its own right is a historic artifact that kind of tells the story of that building, and it has been fully restored. This one and that sign, they had a company come in and actually restore the signs back to their mid-century.
You said earlier that the plan is to keep brick original and paint as accent. How did the book loft get to be painted all blue? I think it looks cheery and lovely, but it's all blue.
So yeah, there's the new paint color.
How did that happen?
So you'll see this building is also painted.
Yeah, I just saw that too.
Also, the Chandlery building is painted.
Okay.
Our historic preservation guidelines really tell us that we shouldn't be painting brick at all because it does trap in moisture. It's not good for the brick. It's not reversible easily. That was painted, and if you look at, if I have a shot of the book loft. The book loft is one of those buildings that lost its first floor, its historic Victorian storefront, and it has a mid-century modern storefront with canted glass storefronts.
Okay.
It's got tile, so sometime probably 50s, 60s, that was done, and at that point, they painted the building. Before we had historic preservation guidelines in place to kind of say you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And now that it's painted, we kind of have to keep it painted.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
When I was working with Main Street, we were working very diligently on restoring the 1971 landscape scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Where did that finish? I'm no longer with Main Street, but where did that end up?
So they're still working on that. So the question was about the landscaping being restored back to looking like the 1970s landscape plan. So downtown, we looked at that historic photo where it was that wide center street. In the mid-70s, as in a lot of places, downtowns were dying, stores were leaving downtowns. The way cities got people back downtown and stores back downtown was to make it more friendly as far as pedestrians. So that's when the roads were, it was made not straight anymore. The trees were added in. So those big oak trees that you see on Center Street were planted in 1975, I believe. So they're not real old, but they, in a short time, got to be really nice sized trees. So that a landscape plan was done then. Center Street was fully landscaped. Over the years, the landscaping plan hasn't been kept up, and that's something Fernandina Beach Main Street is working on now, is revisiting that plan. Some of those plants that were originally in the plan really aren't good for this area, and that's why they didn't survive. So they're looking at kind of redoing a new landscape plan for downtown to get that. It's always a matter of budget, though.
Yeah.
So on the photo back, and it had yoga. Next one back, I think. Right there, it says yoga.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a separate entrance to go to the second floor.
Correct. So, and that was typical. In a lot of the historic storefronts, you would have a storefront, and then you would have a secondary entrance from the front to access the residents above.
Yeah.
A lot of times now they've lost, especially if the building's on a corner, they've lost that front entrance, and it's just part of the store now, and a lot of the buildings you enter from the back, the second floor.
I read not too long ago that the corner that's across from Color Green where Chow's used to be and that they were, are they going to demolish that? And how is that not part historic?
So that's a very good question. And I actually had the same question when that proposal came to me originally. And I'll kind of talk you through that if I can get back to that photo. So that structure, alarm bells went off when a demolition came through to me that they wanted to redevelop that property. And so it is actually this property here. And so using the Sanborn maps, I went back to those maps and looked at what was there historically during our period of significance, because my fear was those are historic buildings. They're a grouping of different buildings that have been added to, and just because you don't see the historic character of it anymore, we really have to be careful that we're not tearing something down inside of it that's important and has significance. And so I was kind of afraid that it was this building. What I found through the study of the different Sanborn maps is all of this went away at some point, and there was nothing on that lot. In the 1960s, it was a gas station. And so it actually was a gas station that the building was back here, and I believe there's one wall of the gas station that still exists inside that building, but it's so altered that there's no significance to it. So losing that structure is not, it's not a contributing structure to the historic district. It has no value to the history. So.
Well, can you talk about that alleyway that was right next to the Amelia Tavern? And it was just a fascinating story to me that somebody just made a store out of the alley, and then they found out that they couldn't do a lot of work on the Amelia Tavern because there was just one wall that if they started working at it.
So that, I don't think I have a modern picture of that. But if you know where the Amelia Tavern is, they've just recently reopened the alley part of the building as the alley, which is really nice with their skylights and all that. But that originally was an alleyway between the two primary buildings. And so I believe it's only 10 feet wide. And you have so the regular buildings with a 10-foot wide alley between them. At some point historically, somebody said, I'm going to use that alley space, closed in the alley space, and made it its own storefront. Which is fine and great, except for the fact that it doesn't have its own walls to support it. So it really is just a roof between the two existing buildings. And that's what happened with that, the Mary Kay building, the old LaCier Motors building, was that when they went not this one. So this is the primary building you're seeing the corner of here. It's the building next door. That's the tavern. So this is the infill building in the alleyway here. You're only kind of seeing part of it. So this is what the tavern is now. This is what that 316 Center Street building is. And then 10 feet of it in here is a one-story kind of fill-in. But it didn't have its own walls. And so when they went to rehab this building, structurally there were issues. And so that's why this building ended up being demolished, because structurally it just didn't work out. But they were able to save, the original storefront wasn't fully there anymore because it had been modernized too. But under the modern storefront were the original columns, which is kind of, always think about kind of when you see some of those modern buildings in other cities, or even we have a couple left in our downtown, sometimes hiding inside of them are the historic buildings.
Yeah, just wondering, to go back to the old Chow building that's going to be demolished. So what are the parameters for what type of building is going there? Does it have to replicate what's there, or how is that with zoning or historic commission?
So that's a really good question, because we don't want to replicate buildings. We don't want a building
that's a fake.
Exactly, kind of a Disney World Victorian building.
Right.
We want you to be able to know that it's a modern building and know that it was built in 2021, but at the same time being compatible with the downtown buildings. So where we talked about traditional building layout, where you have the storefront on the bottom, you have the the windows, the proportions of those windows up top. Really looking at that, looking at the scale of the building. Is it appropriate for its adjoining buildings? Is it something you would have seen? So we do have guidelines for downtown, and we've seen conceptually the plan for that building, and I think a lot of people will be happy with it, that it does fit in scale, because they've really looked at all of those elements. How does it fit in and not feel like a fake Victorian building, but fit in with our Victorian building?
It still look like a dollar store or
Exactly. Exactly. In the back?
Why is there so much variation in terms of preservation, in terms of the quality required? So like with the butterfly garden, I mean, they have the real bricks in it. And then right next to it, you have this concrete that's poured, and they etch it and make like bricks, and they put cake coloring on it, and then within 2 years it's all broken up and it looks terrible. Why are there not standards on that? And I think the city puts in some of those things.
Correct.
I mean, I just know, like in Savannah or places like that, several years ago they were going to paint the building orange, and there was this huge push, and they said, no, you can't do it. And they went back and they had a study and went back through 8 layers of paint, and that was the original.
Yeah. So that's another good point. So historic preservation, the Historic Preservation Act was only signed into law in 1966. So it's fairly new that we have regulations on things like that. A lot of cities like ours went through, and as they went through the decades, did a lot of things that we wouldn't do today, like removing the hex pavers, or even removing the brick from Center Street. So those aren't things we would have done today, but because there weren't things in place, or if there were guidelines in place, they weren't as stringent as they are today. So where we're at today is evaluating all of those types of things, like the 1970s sidewalks and things like that, and their appropriateness. And groups like Main Street are really leading the way in helping come up with standards for things like that, that if we are going to do sidewalks in the future, that they not be fake, stamped concrete, that they be real hex pavers and real brick. The issue with that is, of course, money. Anytime you do something like that, they're big projects. So you have to have support from citizens who understand the significance of those types of things, because if we have to redo the sidewalks, most people are going to say it's cheaper just to put regular concrete back down, just tear everything up and put regular concrete down. And in a lot of ways, that is often a cheaper solution, but it's not necessarily the right solution for a historic city. So I think hopefully that answers your question.
Just as we saved the bricks and reuse them in the tiles, whatever. Have we saved also, do we have a storage area for things like facade decorations and so forth?
No, the city doesn't have the resources to salvage parts like that. What we do is through the Historic District Council, if anyone comes in for a demolition and they're granted a demolition on something, and there is for some reason some historic significance to a portion of the building, one of the conditions that are put on their demolition is that they do a forensic demolition and salvage whatever historic parts that they can. Because it does happen from time to time, like this building in particular, where it is a historic building, but it's not salvageable. So they were able to salvage parts of it. We have some Center Street brick, we have some hex pavers, but it's not enough to put them back or anything like that. It would be a new project where they'd be putting in new hex pavers to look like what they did. Yeah.
Do you have documentation, I used to know this, but I can't, of the year that the Center Street, Brick Street was covered with asphalt?
I was actually trying to find that this week, and I didn't run across it. I found a kind of a time frame, but I couldn't find a year. We got some photos, but the photos aren't dated.
I think I used to know, but I can't my database is overloaded.
Well, if you find out, let me know, because I want to get that down somewhere.
We rebooted.
Yeah. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I'm curious about the street lights downtown. There's a sort of a center, we got old-looking ones, and then in the center, they're kind of 70s looking, and then old. What's up with that?
So, as part of that 1970s project that was done, one of the things, along with the River Pebble sidewalks, the brick walls and the benches and the trees and landscaping, was the lighting, because there wasn't a lot of lighting. When they did that, one of the great benefits was they underground all the electrical. So all those poles that we saw in the earlier photos all went underground when they redid that. But as you saw, the lights were on the poles. So they redid the lighting and picked what's called the Fernandina light. Those lights that are downtown, you won't find in any other city. They were custom designed and custom made for Fernandina. Some people love them, some people hate them. They do have a bit of a 70s look to them, because that's when they were made. They kind of are a carriage lamp style, but in a 70s kind of way. In the 1990s, the city went through and started doing some of the new sidewalks on the side streets and did the stamped hex pavers, the stamped brick, and chose a new light style, which is more the old-fashioned acorn style light, which is not something we had in Fernandina. Other cities did have acorn lights. We didn't particularly have that style, but it was what was chosen at that time to go into the new streetscape. And I think it was thought that eventually everything would match that. What happened was, again, funding, and it never got finished, or the other lights never got changed out. So now we have 3 different types of sidewalk downtown. We have 3 different styles of lighting. It's kind of a hodgepodge. So that's one of the things that I'm working with Main Street, Fernandina Beach, to look at kind of what are the next steps? What's the next evolution? Do we make things cohesive? Do we make new Fernandina lights? Do we pick a new light? Do we, keep the river gravel sidewalks? Do we get rid of those? So we're looking at those recommendations, but with those recommendations, without money, they don't really go anywhere. So it really is going to take, citizen advocacy when those recommendations come out, people to say, this might cost more, but it's important to the city.
When did the trolley go away?
So it was before the 20s, which we had probably up until the Depression, good tourism. But in that photo we have from 1924, the trolley was already gone. So it was slightly before then. But up until then, we have plenty of photos of it, up and down the street. Anybody else? If anybody has any other questions, you can always email email me or call me. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, John, that was really
Thank you, Sal. I really enjoyed it.
No problem.
Good to see you.